Hello and welcome, and thank you for all attending today's webcast, Sleep and Autism, Helping Children and Families Get the Rest They Need, offered in collaboration with our featured presenter, Dr. Beth Malow from the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center. All attendees are in listen-only mode throughout the webinar to provide the best audio for presentations. We want you to type your questions or comments into the question box on the webinar control panel. The presentation is going to be followed by a 15-minute question and answer period. The webinar is recorded and we'll post it on our Research Match YouTube channel. And at the end, we ask that you please take a moment and give us your feedback by completing a very brief survey after exiting the webinar. The information and statements expressed on this webinar are not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice. Viewers should seek their own professional counsel for any medical condition and before altering an existing care plan. I'm Loretta Byrne, the Program Manager for Research Match, and I'm also a nurse. And I just want to say a very special thank you to you, to all of you who have joined Research Match to learn about research opportunities. The image on the right-hand side of my screen here displays the map of all of the 146,000 plus Research Match volunteers from across the United States, which includes Puerto Rico. As a national community of people who are willing to learn about research, you are making a difference and you're at the heart of research discoveries. By joining Research Match and taking part, you're making an impact because you help researchers generate new knowledge. On the left-hand side of my screen, I'm showing the results page from the Research Match website, which lists some of the scientific publications that have resulted because of volunteers like you. The image on the right-hand side shows all of the current research centers around the country that use Research Match to search for people to take part in their research. Research Match is fully funded by grants from the National Institutes of Health. And Research Match is really not just one institution or one partner, or it's not about one research study. We're really a nation of many groups working together to improve the health and well-being of everyone by advancing research discoveries. Currently, our network includes over 8,000 researchers from 169 different research institutions, and it also includes 60 nonprofit partner organizations from across the US. We collaborate and we welcome our researchers and our partners on these webinars because they provide education and resources and connections so that all of us can be more informed. So again, we're going to open it up for your questions at the end, and I'll now turn the presentation over to my colleague, Leslie Boone, who will introduce our speaker. Leslie is a research project manager at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and within her role, she works with Research Match to create opportunities like this so that we can share research findings and the value of research studies with the public. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you, Loretta, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. Our guest speaker, as Loretta has already indicated, is Dr. Beth Malow. Dr. Malow is the Berry Chair in Cognitive Childhood Development and Professor of Neurology and Pediatrics and Director of the Sleep Division at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. Her research program focuses on the impact of treating sleep problems and autism on daytime functioning and quality of life. Dr. Malow is inspired by raising two sons on the autism spectrum who are now in college. Dr. Malow has published more than 120 peer-reviewed articles, along with multiple books, book chapters, and review articles. She serves as the principal investigator for Vanderbilt's Autism Speaks Autism Treatment Network, ASATN. It's one of 12 sites, 12 regional sites or centers across North America funded to develop standards of medical care for children with autism. So without further ado, we will hear from Dr. Beth Malow on sleep and autism, helping children and families get the rest they need. Dr. Malow?
Yes, hello. I'm just making sure that the screen shows up. Let's see. I pressed the share your screen. Let's see, show screen. Show screen is paused, show screen. Can people see my screen?
We can see your screen. We don't see your slides yet.
Okay. Let me see if I can pull them up. Okay, what about now? Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Let's see. Okay, let me go to the, sorry about that. I thought I had it pulled up. Let's see, that's the end. Let's go back to the beginning and then we'll just click through these really quick. Okay, I think we're good now. People should be able to see questions we will address today.
Yep, we got it.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, sorry about that little glitch. So yeah, first of all, thank you very much for allowing me to participate in this webinar. I'm very excited about Research Match. As I'll be telling you later on when I show you a real life study, we've really been very successful in recruiting from the Research Match community, and we're very grateful to Research Match for allowing us to connect with families who are interested in our work. So I'm going to talk about that, but I'm also going to talk first about just sleep problems in general, what sleep problems children on the autism spectrum have, what are the causes and contributors, what is the impact of poor sleep on daytime behavior, autism symptoms in the family, and what's involved in taking part in research, as well as highlighting this online study that we've just completed enrollment on. And it's really timely given our situation right now in this country with everybody staying in, because you can do the entire study, including consenting, surveying, and access to the interventional materials entirely online. So we'll talk about all these things, and let's see, there we go. So autism spectrum disorder, just for those of you who don't see it every day, it's very, very common. It's now felt to be 1 in 59 children, and 500,000 individuals are going from being 17 to 18 every year. So we're entering adulthood. So that's quite a large number. I'm sorry, 50,000. I take that back, 50,000 per year, but 500,000 over the next 10 years will become adults. And then 50 to 80% of individuals with autism have sleep problems. So sleep problems are very common in autism. And the core symptoms of autism include problems with communicating or interacting, as well as restricted interests and repetitive behaviors, and sometimes sensory sensitivities like being more sensitive to noise or to light. And there's a real spectrum of these symptoms. So some kids, like you see in the picture in the right-hand corner, are in their own little world, while others can be quite socially gregarious, but not always appropriate. And then the restricted interest could be anything from being interested in vacuum cleaners to being interested in sports and knowing all your sports statistics. So there's a lot of variety. Some kids have intellectual disability, others have normal or even superior intelligence. And there's also these associated symptoms. Seizures are very common. Psychiatric conditions like ADHD, anxiety are very common. And then sleep problems, as I mentioned, in 50 to 80%. And what I'm very interested in is if we can impact sleep, if we can improve sleep, it's in and of itself, it's good, right? Because the family feels better and more well-rested if they're not waking up in the middle of the night to comfort their child who's up. The child's health is better because we know when we sleep better, health is better, you know, our heart is better, our lungs are better, our immune system. But I think there's also a huge opportunity in autism to improve some of these core symptoms. So what do I mean? Like, are we really going to cure a child's ability to speak? Like, are they going to start talking if we improve their sleep? Well, probably not directly, but indirectly. And what I mean by that is if they're in a therapy session and they're not able to make the progress they need with speech because they're sleepy, you know, they were up the night before, they didn't get really a good night's sleep. So what that manifests itself as It could be not being able to focus in the session. It could be meltdowns in the session. The session is not going to go as well as if they had a really good night's sleep. And their parents are going to be able to support them better in their therapy sessions if they've had a good night's sleep too. So that's what I mean about how sleep can impact some of these symptoms. I'm sorry, I'm having some difficulty with these slides. There we go. Sorry about that. So sleep concerns in autism, what are some of the major concerns? What we see is in this study, and there have been multiple studies that have replicated it, is difficulty falling asleep, restless sleep, unwillingness to fall asleep in one's own bed, kind of like a bedtime resistance. And to give you an example of a child who has those problems and more is Alex. I'm a clinician, so I like to give examples. So Alex is 10 and he has autism spectrum disorder, which we refer to as ASD. He goes to bed at 8 p.m. and he takes hours to fall asleep. And what his parents describe, which is very common, is this inability to shut your brain down. I've had kids also tell me this who are able to speak and articulate their feelings. It's like this over arousal of the brain. Now, Alex takes methylphenidate, which is Ritalin, and it's for ADHD-like symptoms, attention deficit hyperactivity symptoms. He takes those in the morning and in the afternoon, and he also enjoys a glass of Mountain Dew with dinner. Mountain Dew has a lot of caffeine in it. And he plays video games after dinner, and then he just can't settle down. He can't shut his brain down. He keeps coming to find his parents, and they rub his back to help him fall asleep. And then once asleep, they leave the room, but then he awakens multiple times during the night. He sometimes comes to their room, falls asleep there. He also snores, and he has very restless sleep, and he kicks his legs a lot. And it's really hard to wake him up for school in the morning. His classroom teacher describes him as being sleepy and hyperactive and disruptive in class. And his parents, as you can imagine, are exhausted from not sleeping themselves and being up with him and very overwhelmed by what's going on at school. So what we do when we see somebody like Alex in the clinic, there we go, is I like to kind of unpack his problems. So this is a simplistic way to look at it, but there's biological causes, medical causes, and behavioral causes, and they really do overlap and interact with each other. But I find this helpful to explain to families as a starting point. And we're going to focus on that red box today, the behavioral cause. And when we say behavioral, we don't mean bad behaviors. We mean things that the family may be doing or the child may be doing that are contributing to poor sleep habits. And these could include, for example, having too much caffeine in the form of Mountain Dew or iced tea, watching video games that can be stimulating, and the light from the video games can also be very stimulating and can actually interfere with our releasing our melatonin levels, natural melatonin levels that our bodies make. This bedtime of 8 p.m. may actually be too early, especially as Alex gets older, because as we go into adolescence and go through puberty, our bedtime actually shifts by about 2 hours, our natural bedtime. And then parent interactions, such as Alex becoming dependent on his parent to rub his back and fall asleep, so that when he wakes up and nobody's rubbing his back, it may turn from just a brief awakening where it can go right back to sleep into a full-blown awakening. And then other things that I didn't mention in the example can also take place, like limited exercise or stimulating activities at bedtime, or even some of these core symptoms I mentioned, like the sensory sensitivities. The room may be too dark, or there may be too much noise or too little noise. Restricted interests, such as the Thomas the Tank Engine, where Alex is focusing on a video or a movie and he can't calm himself to go to sleep, or even communication challenges where the parents try to explain to Alex what he needs to do to get ready for bed and he doesn't understand because of his language problem with the autism. So I just want to go back one slide and mention, I'm not going to go into details, but just so you're aware, there also are biological and medical causes. Some medical could be sleep apnea, which is a breathing problem in sleep. And we mentioned Alex snores, and that could wake him up from sleep. He might have GI problems like constipation or reflux. He might have seizures. And then these biological things could be anxiety or overstimulation, or even different ways that he processes brain chemicals in, that are affected in sleep, like melatonin that he makes on his own. So I'm not going to get into those today, but I wanted you to be at least aware of them because it is complex and there's lots of different things that could be going on in a child with autism who isn't sleeping. I also wanted to mention the impact on daytime behavior. So people have done these, they're called functional MRI studies, fMRI, and basically what they are is they're pictures that you can get of the brain, and they're not static. So in other words, they're not just like a picture of the brain and the different structures, but they show what the brain is doing when the brain is involved in some task. So in this experiment that I mentioned here, they showed people scary things like bugs crawling or whatever, and they compared what the brain looked like in people who saw these scary objects who had either slept or didn't sleep for 24 hours. And the ones who hadn't slept for 24 hours, the brain showed increased activation, meaning this part of the brain was more active. And that was in the amygdala, which is a fear center deep in the brain, and also the prefrontal cortex, which kind of keeps our fear in check and keeps our anxiety out of control. This is the part of the brain that gets stronger when you meditate, for example. And prefrontal cortex was more connected with the amygdala and was able to do its job in keeping the amygdala in check and calm in people who had slept compared to people who didn't sleep. So there really is a reason why we feel grumpy and grouchy and out of control when we haven't slept. So that's one issue where sleep can definitely impact anxiety, fear, behavior. And then a couple of studies from the research literature in autism. One looked at more than 2,700 kids with autism in a big genetic study, and they showed that the severity scores for core symptoms like repetitive behaviors, like social interactions, were worse in the kids who got less sleep. So they were more severely affected. And then in another study, sleep problems, particularly night wakings, were associated with aggression, irritability, inattention, and hyperactivity. Now, one thing to keep in mind as a research community is these are association studies. So they don't prove that poor sleep causes poor behavior or increased irritability or hyperactivity, but there's an association. So the next thing you have to do is actually improve sleep and see if through improving sleep, you can then improve some of these symptoms. And that's some of the work we've done and in our study. So I just want to mention, I'm going to focus most of my time now on treatment, because that's what everybody really wants to know about and really wants to figure out how we can help families. And this is a lovely quote from Lucy Wiggs in the UK. And she wrote about sleep problems in kids with intellectual disabilities and challenging daytime behavior. When you treat it, it not only improves the sleep, as I said, but it actually also improves parenting stress, increases parenting satisfaction with their own sleep, their child's sleep, and heightens their sense of control and ability to cope with their sleep. So when we do these behavioral treatments of sleep in children with autism, the big partner is the parents or the caregivers. It's not like we're working directly with the child. We're working with the child through the parents, and it's incredibly gratifying to parents when they feel like they're making a difference in their child's sleep. And I've had parents go on and tell me, hey, I went to a meeting at the school for the IEP, the individualized education plan, and I was able to really assert myself with the teachers, and it made a huge difference. And so the parents get a lot of confidence when they engage in this research with us. Now, the question is, what does behavioral treatment mean? Like, what are the specific things that we do? And it's simple, but it's complex. It's complex because there's oftentimes a lot of things going on at once, but the simple is these are truly simple habits, and we all sleep, so we all know what they are. And it's sometimes just a matter of explaining them to a parent in a way that they can internalize them and do them. So when we talk about sleep habits, we talk about what's called sleep hygiene. So daytime habits, evening habits, sleep environment, and bedtime routine. It's not just about what happens at bedtime. It's even what happened with light during the day, exercise during the day. Is there a regular sleep-wake cycle? And are the phones off, as you can see here? That's a huge one. Either turning off the phones, or if a child is glued to their phone, using the dimmer switch on the phone, the settings to let the phone go dimmer at night. All this is part of sleep hygiene and habits. And we devised a family inventory of sleep habits and published on this in 2009. And it's very simple. It's just 12 questions that a parent could fill out in a waiting room or whatever. And then the clinician can look and see which areas they want to target with the family. Like if the child isn't getting a lot of exercise, that may be an area to focus on, and explain to the parent how exercise promotes sleep. And you can see the questions here, and we can make this available to you later if needed. And then the other things: exercise, abundant light, limiting caffeine, limiting naps, using the bedroom for sleep and not for punishment or even for studying, because sometimes kids who study in their bedroom might associate the bedroom with like an exam or something. But it is important to realize, and we need to take into account, sometimes people can't do that. You know, like the houses are really small, or they live in an apartment. So we work with families to try to tailor what they have in a realistic way to these components. At night, limiting stimulating activities, less light, more establishing routines, making sure the sleep environment is comfortable. You know, some kids need light and some kids need sound. So like a dim light, night light is good. My son really did not want to go to sleep in the dark. He wanted some light on. He also wanted some noises filtering up from the house so that he wasn't scared. So really, this has to be fine-tuned to the specific child. And then there's this concept of sleep timing and amount and regularity. And it's interesting because many of you may have had the experience where, let's say you go to bed at, I don't know, 11 o'clock at night, but you have to catch a plane the next day at 6 in the morning, and you have to be at the airport at 4:30. So you're like, okay, I'm going to just go to bed tonight at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock so I can get some sleep before I have to wake up. And if you're anything like me, you're in bed an hour or two before your regular bedtime, and you're tossing and turning. You just can't sleep. And the reason that is because we're actually more alert in the half an hour or the hour before our regular bedtime than we are at any other time during the day. So let's take Alex, and let's say that his natural bedtime, you can see it's falling off here. Well, this actually wouldn't be Alex. This would be another kid. This would be, let's say, a 5-year-old child. And his bedtime is 8 o'clock. And he starts falling asleep at 8 o'clock. You can see here, there's a drive that makes you sleepier and sleepier as the day goes on. There's also a circadian drive that gives a second wind. Don't worry too much about these two. But this is what I want you to look at. At 8 o'clock, this kid is ready to go to sleep. They're ready to go from their alert zone to their sleepy zone right here. But they're fully awake at 7:30. They're more awake at 7:30, more alert than any other time during the whole day or night. So if you put a child to bed too early, you put them in their forbidden zone. And I think that what might have been what was going on with Alex is he was going to bed too early. And that can actually contribute to kids lying awake, tossing and turning. If they don't have speech because of autism, they may be fussing. They can't even explain that they're not too tired to their parents. The solution is to delay bedtime. But this is sometimes easier said than done. Kids love it. You know, when I say to them in clinic in front of their parents, let's go to bed a little later, they're like, yay. And the parents are looking at me like, why did I come to this appointment? Because I can't do it. I've been with my child all day. I need a break, or I need to make school lunches, or I need to do X, Y, and Z. So we need to work with families to figure out, not just to teach what these concepts are and why it's important to pick the right bedtime, but we also need to figure out a way that we can implement these strategies that the parents can do, you know, that's realistic for families. And that to me is really the fun of all of this work. Amount of sleep is also important, regularity of sleep. You know, there's these beautiful graphs and charts of how much sleep a child may need. Parents oftentimes gravitate to the top number. So if a 3-year-old needs to get 9 to 11 hours of sleep a night, they're going to jump to the 11 hours. The child with autism might need less. They might need 9 hours. So, you know, really trying to educate folks on amount of sleep, and then the regularity, going to bed, waking up at the same time every day, every night is just critical, because, or, you know, within a half an hour at most, because it confuses the body when the body is trying to regulate its sleep-wake cycle and release chemicals like melatonin if the bedtime and wake time is constantly changing. So those are some of the things we do with timing. We also construct bedtime routines, like you see here. Kids with autism are extremely gifted in terms of visual skills. So you can explain to them what they need to do to go to bed, but if you show them a drawing, or you even give them a checklist, if they're older, they have more language, it's like magic. They love to follow it. They love to do the Velcro. You can incorporate choices like read a book versus playing Legos, and they can choose. And this really gives a lot of structure. It decreases anxiety. Some kids are really anxious, and a lot of parents have been told, you know, let your child just cry it out, they'll go to sleep on their own. And that might work for typically developing kids, but a lot of kids with autism don't understand if they're left alone to cry and fall asleep on their own. A lot of parents are very disturbed by doing that. So we like to give parents other options besides letting their child learn how to fall asleep on their own and soothe themselves. And one of those is to be in the room with the child in a chair. It could be a comfortable chair, rocking chair, not facing the child, not making lots of eye contact and reinforcement, but being present so that the child isn't as scared because they know that their parent is in the room. And then the parent can move the chair closer to the door each night until they're out. And then they can reward their child with morning stickers or a basket of presents for learning how to sleep on their own. We also go over that rubbing of the back scenario, like with Alex, that if a child can fall asleep on their own and not have the parent rubbing their back or anything else, then they're more likely to go back to sleep. So the pacifier is the classic example with infants, right? The child falls asleep with the pacifier and the pacifier falls out, the child wakes up. So we have to watch out for rubbing of the back. We have to watch out for parent being asleep in the room until the child falls asleep, you know, lying down next to them. We try to get them at least into the rocking chair. These things are all important. So we go over that. We go over, you know, maybe the child is now asleep in their room. The parent might want to move upstairs temporarily so that if they hear the child coming out of their room, they can get the kid back into bed, and the child reassure them, but not necessarily spend a lot of time with them, more just good night, go to sleep, I'll see you in the morning. And then these visual reminders and these reward charts can be very, very helpful. I love this concept of the bedtime pass. The child has to have some language. It works from what I've seen best in like maybe 4 to 8 year olds. And what it is the child can pick out a pass. It's laminated. If you have a laminator, that's great. It can be Moon and Stars. It can be anything the child really likes. It could be a cartoon character. And what happens is it's a laminated card or a card. So the child is given the card and given this little story, and the parents read the story to the child and say, look, here's your pass. If you need anything, like you need a drink of water, you come out of your room, you give me the pass, I give you the drink of water. So it's like a ticket. But you can decide to stay in bed all night and keep the pass. In other words, you may decide, I'm just going to hang on to this pass and not use it overnight. I'll just keep it with me in case I need it in the middle of the night. And then if you get through the night and you don't need, to leave your room and give the pass to the parent, you get a reward. And it's less about bribing the child, because people have asked me that over the years. It's more about, I think, the child having something they can hold in their hands that's concrete. And it also puts a lot of these kids with autism who have like the Asperger's form, where there's a big need for control. It puts them in the driver's seat. They're in control. They can either use this ticket and this pass and leave room, or call out to their parents and get what they need, or they can say, I'm just going to be brave, hold on to it, and then in the morning get a reward. And after doing this for like 3 or 4 nights, a lot of kids are done. Like, they don't need this for the rest of their lives or the rest of their childhood. They just learn how to, fall asleep on their own and not wake up in the middle of the night. So I wanted to bring that up as something that has been very useful to us. And in a few minutes, I'm going to show you some resources where you can actually download these passes for free and use them with your families. And then even kids with limited language can benefit from some of these tools. Schedule boards that use the actual items that would be involved in going to bed, the shampoo, the toilet paper, the brush, rocking, swinging, all of these different techniques. First, then boards. First we're going to sleep, then we're going to watch a video in the morning, or even a stop sign that would go on the child's bedroom door and remind them to not leave the room to find their parents in the middle of the night, but to go back to bed. So this was one of the first studies we did, and we taught all of these skills to parents, and we did it in one of 2 ways. We either gave parents of kids with autism a pamphlet that they would read, or we gave them nothing. That was phase 1. And then in the second phase, we actually taught them through classes, either group classes or individualized classes, where they met with an educator. And we looked at their sleep and we looked at their behavior before and after these interventions. And when I say look at their sleep, we put watches on them called actigraphy watches. They're kind of like Fitbits or Apple Watches, but they're more research grade, research reliable. And we found that the time to fall asleep using these watches, because the watches would track when they were awake, when they were asleep, based on movement and rest. We showed, if you look at these blue bars, that the parents who got either the group education or the individual education with a trained sleep educator had about 20-minute improvement in the time it took them to fall asleep, compared to those who got the pamphlet or no treatment. And these were statistically significant improvements in the educational group. There was no difference, interestingly, between whether individual or group education was given. They both did well. And we also looked at behavior. We looked at a questionnaire on sleep. We looked at parenting sense of competence, how good they felt they were as parents, how effective, how satisfied. And all of these improved in the individual and group sleep education. And then we took this into community practice. And basically, we trained therapists in the community to train parents. Pediatricians made referrals and made sure that the children didn't have like seizures or sleep apnea or reflux or some other problem. But the therapists actually did the training. And it was very brief. It was 1 to 1.5 hours with 2 follow-up sessions. And the therapists achieved their fidelity goals. The parents achieved scores of good to excellent understanding, comfort, and implementation on these scales that we gave them to kind of test their knowledge. And then they also reported improvements. And we did interviews. We've also done actigraphy, and we basically found very similar results to what we found in the more formal study that we did, that I showed you a moment or two ago, that was done in academic centers. So we can do this in the community. This work is submitted for publication right now. It's under review. And that makes us very excited. However, not every community has a therapist who can do this. We're still trying to figure out how we can train therapists to do this. And I think this latest coronavirus pandemic has shown us that we need to be really creative, and we need to also think about moving studies into the home. We did not design the study knowing what was going to happen with the coronavirus. We designed the study because we wanted to make our work accessible to families, even in rural areas, or families that did not have therapists they could have access to. What we did is we developed an online portal, which I'll show you in a moment, and we enrolled, our goal was to enroll 100 children. We actually exceeded that with the help of Research Match and other groups. We're very excited that we've met and exceeded our enrollment, but our goal is 100 children. And parents reported the insomnia complaints, the sleep onset delay, night wakings, bedtime resistance. We phone screened them. Everything was in the home. They did it at home. They did electronic consent. And then once they gave consent, they could unlock surveys, and then they could fill out the surveys, and then they would have educational materials unlocked. And then they would view these materials and then complete more surveys. So this is what they would see. They would get on their phones, they would be given a link to go, and this is all like HIPAA protected and password protected. They would fill out an informed consent, and then after they did the informed consent, which you can see here in blue, it would unlock these surveys to fill out a baseline. I already showed you the family inventory of sleep habits, and then there were a few other surveys they filled out. And then they would then, you can see the check mark, they would do the baseline, and then they would have access to either just a pamphlet, just like we had done with the previous study, available in English and Spanish for those families who are bilingual. And then the other group would get not just a pamphlet, but they would get quick tip sheets on how to use the bedtime pass, and for children with limited skills, limited verbal skills. They would also get access to videos that walk a parent through how to implement these skills that are outlined in the written materials. And then after they view these, they would complete another set of surveys at 4 weeks, and then at 12 weeks, and then do a feedback form. And it's all like unlocked. So after they, do the 4 weeks, once 12 weeks pass, they would get to see the 12-week surveys. And then when they do the 12-week surveys at the end, they would do the feedback. And we also were able to track, this is just the informed consent document, and the parent feedback survey showing, this one parent was assigned sleep pamphlet quick tips videos. They found everything useful. They talk about, we were asking questions about how different parts of the toolkit would be used. We also were able to track how well these families were using it. So for example, if a family was using it, like they looked at the videos one time and that was it, versus looking at the videos 3 or 4 times, we could track that. And so basically our enrollment and randomization exceeded goals. We enrolled 150 and randomized 139. I have never exceeded goals for recruitment like I have in this online study. And I think it speaks to the nature of how easy it is for families to do research online. And then we're testing the hypothesis that families who get everything will have improved sleep habits, patterns, and sense of competence. We're also looking, as I mentioned, at is it the families who actually access the materials and access the materials more, the more times they access it, the better they are. We're going to look at that as well. And then we found coordinators have found the study easy to recruit for. Families have found it easy to access the materials. It's not affected by the family's concern about social distancing or being in a rural area or anything else. And I'm really excited because I feel like this type of work is going to support future online studies, not just in autism, but in any population. And I think that this is kind of the wave of the future where we're going. So there are a bunch of resources that I've mentioned. This Autism Speaks Autism Treatment Network Toolkit has a lot of things on it, not just bedtime passes and quick tips and everything else, but you can also find tools for other aspects related to autism on that toolkit, and that's free. And then there's a study finder at Vanderbilt Kennedy Center that will show you how you can get involved in research. And then it's very important to bring up that Autism Speaks has put together this amazing group of resources for COVID-19, including just how do you work with your child when they're home? You know, how do you keep their education going, and how do you keep them calm, and how do you keep your family not just safe but happy during this challenging time? So I wanted to have those resources available for you. And I think we're now ready for questions.
Thank you, Beth. This is Loretta Byrne again. That was wonderful, Dr. Malow. Thank you for sharing your research and these wonderful resources. It's absolutely fascinating to me. I also wanted to mention to the people that are listening that you may be volunteers on Research Match. So you're registered, you've registered yourself as a 20, a 30, a 40, a 50-year-old man or woman with your health conditions, but you might have children who have autism. A researcher like Dr. Malow will come on Research Match and then look for children with autism. But if you haven't registered your child, she has no way of knowing that you have that child with autism or that you're interested. So when you log into Research Match on your dashboard, you can add your child as your volunteer, because you're their dependent. You're going to put in your email for them. So any studies come and go. You can see Dr. Mallow's was on there for a while, and then now it's finished, so she's not recruiting anymore. But when a researcher like Dr. Mallow comes on, she would then see that your child is in Research Match and has autism. The email is your email. So your child is never going to get an email from a researcher. You're going to get the email, and you'll get to see that there's somebody interested, and then you get to decide. So I just want to share that with you, that you can go onto your dashboard and add your children if that interests you, but you always have control because it's only your email. So with that, I'll pass it back on to Leslie, who will help ask our questions.
Dr. Mallow, thank you again. We do have some questions in the question box, and I believe I'm going to read these questions. If I did not include all the information you'd like to include, please enter additional information into the question box or the chat. So the first question we have is, I have been home with three kids with autism, 2 high functioning. Says there is a strong genetic background of bipolar, which is likely in higher percentage than in neurotypical people. I'm trying to figure out if I'm losing something here. Casey, do I see the whole question?
You should see it.
Okay. So anyway, it says there is a strong genetic background of bipolar, which is likely in higher percentage than in neurotypical people. FYI, these, it went too fast. It says FYI, these are young adults. Two of my kids have a difficult time going to bed at typical bedtimes. Without work, school, one adult had to frequently wait until the next day to actually try to get back on track. This happened with regularity when they didn't have school or work. They now have bright open windows in their room to try to get up earlier, and gratefully they are back in college. Any other suggestions to help with having a higher functioning autistic, 2 or higher functioning autistic children, and 1 not higher functioning, to help with their sleep?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Yes, bipolar is another one of those conditions that can definitely be associated with autism. And I think that what is being done with the light is excellent. The, you know, what light is just great in the morning. And then as the day goes on, we want to decrease it. But I probably didn't emphasize enough the importance of a bright light in the morning, because it really wakes us up. And it also, believe it or not, makes it easier to fall asleep at night if we get bright light in the morning, because it synchronizes our whole biological clock. The other thing that I like about what was said is it not only is helping the child with autism sleep, but the whole family. So exposing everyone to bright light, I think you could do a similar thing if you're looking for other things with exercise. Exercise is great. Exercise is similar to light in that you don't want to exercise too late in the day because it can be stimulating and interfere with sleep. But earlier in the day is fantastic, and it's also promotes health as well. Minimizing caffeine and remembering what has caffeine in it. Some people don't realize that iced tea has caffeine. Some people think that diet sodas don't have caffeine. They don't have sugar, but they do have caffeine. So really making sure that you read the labels and know what's you know, what's in the drink. But I think those are, to me, the big three are exercise. Well, four. There's exercise, there's light, there's caffeine, and then, of course, the screens. Trying to get off of those screens or put them on dimmer modes close to bedtime.
We have a couple of other questions. The question is, we have a 9-year-old granddaughter who frequently talks to herself for hours before falling asleep. She speaks well during the day, but this nighttime talk is mostly gibberish. Any suggestions to help her in her sleep?
Yeah, so that's a great example. The 9-year-old who's got the kind of repetitive we call that a repetitive behavior, which is the speaking at night, and sometimes it's reciting, you know, words from a video that the child may like. Sometimes it's just you know, sounds they come up with, but it definitely can be stimulating and interfere with sleep. It's not the easiest thing to get rid of. I would say trying to substitute another activity that wouldn't be as stimulating. And this is kind of trial and error. That's what I like about kind of the approaches we use is it really is individualized, because some kids will want to do one thing, others won't. Like, for example, music. I might thinking about music with that child, because if she's hearing kind of music in the background, it could be soothing, it could be music with a beat. Some kids like the music with the beat more, but it might be harder for her to do the gibberish if she's focused on listening to music. You might want to give her some earbuds or earphones to listen and play some different kinds of music, and that might break the cycle of her doing the gibberish, which could be incredibly stimulating and interfere with her sleep, and substituting it for something else. It could be something tactile, like rubbing a warm fuzzy blanket. You know, again, it's kind of a trial and error situation.
Okay, we have several other questions. I'm going to interject this one here. Is sleepwalking common among children with autism? And if so, does this behavior continue into adulthood?
So sleepwalking, we don't think it's necessarily more common in autism, but it's common in general in children. And it is really important to know, well, when I see somebody with sleepwalking, the most important thing to me is I want to make sure we're not missing something else, because sometimes a breathing problem like sleep apnea or leg movements or something else could trigger the sleepwalking episode. And I want to make sure that it's also you know, like, why is the child sleepwalking? If it runs in the family, if parents have a history of sleepwalking, if brothers and sisters sleepwalk, I feel much more comfortable than if this is the only person in the family who sleepwalks, because because then I start thinking, is it something else like a seizure problem or something like that? So I ask about the family. I ask the time of the night that the sleepwalking is happening. If it's an hour or two after falling asleep, that's very reassuring because that's when sleepwalking normally occurs. That's when we have our deeper levels of sleep. And sleepwalking kind of represents this, like you're kind of half awake, half asleep, like you're not still asleep, you're not fully awake, you're kind of in between. So if it's in the first part of the night when most of that deep sleep is happening, I feel better. If I always ask, is there something the child is doing that looks the same every time? Are they lifting an arm the same way or tensing up a muscle? That if it's the same thing every time, we call that stereotyped, and that may be concerning for seizure. And I might even sometimes have the parents do some videoing for me so I can see what it looks like. So all of these things are basically making sure that it's just kind of garden variety sleepwalking. And then if it's once in a while, I just reassure the parent that the child will grow out of it. But if it's more frequent or the child doesn't grow out of it and they start doing it as an older child, adolescent, adult, then I start saying, gee, I wonder if we need to do a sleep study or possibly a sleep study with an EEG to look for seizure or sleep apnea. And then the other thing I always do, even if it's what I'm calling garden variety sleepwalking, is safety precautions, making sure the home is safe, making sure the child isn't going to fall or fall down the stairs or hurt themselves in some way. So that's kind of how I approach sleepwalking. So the short answer is not necessarily more common in autism, but it is common enough that we want to be able to address it.
Okay, thank you. So we have several other questions. Given those scenarios we've already talked about, should parents ask their pediatrician about a sleep study?
I think that the parents should ask the pediatrician if the child is having trouble sleeping, if they could be either instructed in how they can help their child with autism sleep better, or if they can have a referral to a sleep specialist. And this is where it gets tricky because a lot of pediatricians are not equipped. They have so many demands on them that they're not necessarily equipped to help a child with sleep, particularly one with autism. But they may know some resources in the community. They may know a really good sleep specialist. They may know, my hope is over time, we can get more of these therapists involved, like I've shown you, where they may know a really good therapist who can work with sleep and work with a child. And what I really hope is that pediatricians will know about these resources. We're trying to get them out more and more to pediatricians. But one of the reasons we're doing Research Match today and reaching out to you all is because sometimes the best way to get information into the hands of parents, particularly when we're dealing with these behavioral strategies and we're not talking about drugs or anything like that, is to really get the information directly in the public's hands. And that's what we're also trying to do with some of these online studies. So if the online study shows that these materials helps children sleep, we can really try to target that for the, not just in the research study, but use the results of the research study to make this more available to parents across the country.
Thank you. Have another question, wanting to know, is there work related to diet and sleep beyond caffeine intake?
Yeah, so diet it's one of those individual things. I definitely have seen kids who eat more sugar or have a certain element of food in their diet, like maybe they're lactose intolerant or they have, some mild gluten sensitivities. I've definitely seen that interfere with sleep, particularly if they're having like GI stomach issues. The sugar for sure. So yeah, I think that if a child is having difficulty with sleep, that's one of the things we look at is diet, caffeine, but also sugar, gluten, lactose.
Okay. We have several other questions. So is bedwetting at night common among children with autism? And if so, how should parents deal with it? And will it continue into adulthood?
So bedwetting, again, is not necessarily more common in autism, but it's very common. And there are some very good strategies now, including there's sensors that a child can wear on their bed, like the bed cover, so can sense when there's the beginnings of some moisture and gently vibrate to wake up the child, and then the child knows they need to use the bathroom. There's a lot of different strategies. I think that the one place you definitely want to bring that to the pediatrician's attention to see if there's anything medical going on, and then working with some of these behavioralists can be very effective, because children with autism just might need a little bit more help understanding the sensation of being wet and knowing, it's coming on, they need to use the bathroom. But again, it's not more common, but their ability to react to it may be different because of their autism.
Okay. I'm going to read a couple of other questions. We're trying to get to all of them. One of our attendees says, I have a 19-year-old ASD, Asperger's, ADHD, and Tourette's, and he has always had problems with sleep. He complains of seeing things at night and not sleeping well. I was wondering if it is narcolepsy. He is sleepy during the day. We started melatonin for 10 milligrams, and he has less episodes. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's really interesting. One of the features of narcolepsy, it's a brain disease where you're sleepy during the day. And in addition to being sleepy, you can sometimes see things at night that aren't there. It's almost like having a dream when you're awake. And you could feel like you're paralyzed and unable to move, which is partly what we are in a dream. So it's very possible he could have it. There are testing that could be done, sleep testing that can be done for narcolepsy. So this is definitely where making a referral to a pediatric, or if he's 19, an adult sleep specialist would be very appropriate. I am intrigued that the melatonin is helping. That's probably a whole other hour talking about melatonin, but it can sometimes be helpful. Again, very important to talk to the pediatrician, make sure the child or adult isn't on any other drugs that can interfere. Make sure you read the label, because sometimes melatonin could be mixed with Benadryl or other things. But I think it's great that he's doing better with the melatonin. I still probably would want to at least tell the pediatrician or the, I guess if he's 19, the adult provider about what's been going on, so that he can be referred to a sleep specialist for evaluation if needed.
Okay, I'm going to do one last question in these last 2 minutes. How can parents assist in changing or establishing sleep patterns if children are super resistant?
Great question. Great closing question. I think the key is to come up with something that really appeals to the child, and also to not underestimate the power of routine. So sometimes what's making a child quote unquote super resistant is fear and anxiety and just not understanding what they're being asked to do. And if a little routine could be put in place that includes activities that are really interesting to the child, playing with Legos, reading books, using that first then example that I showed you earlier, that can make all the difference. So we don't want to assume that a child is super resistant until we've kind of broken through that, and we make sure that we've at least addressed some of those communications issues and built in some rewards.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mallow. We've learned a lot from your presentation today, and certainly appreciate you spending time with us on this web conference to learn more about the importance of autism and autism research. We're also glad that we had the pleasure to share this information with the Research Match volunteers and others who have attended this particular webinar. If you have questions about Research Match, please visit us at info@researchmatch.org or visit www.researchmatch.org for more information. If you would like to listen to this webcast again, please visit the Research Match YouTube channel at the end of this week. I know that there are some other questions we didn't get to, so feel free to send those to us as well. So on behalf of Research Match and our featured collaborator, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day and be safe.